So quantum mechanics is essentially saying that there's a number of values like spin, charge, mass, hypercharge that can exist at any point in space. They are a probability distribution and they're quantized in some way, which means that you can't have any value. You can only have a few select values.
You have to understand what you're building, you understand what permits you need. That's just comparing your design with your geolocation with the permits that are needed. Then it's working with the local government agency to figure out what are the timelines. There's some little bit of human element there, but if you eliminated all of that work, there's an hour conversation, and then it's taking those permits and putting them into a schedule, maybe some cost of fees and things like that, and some document retrieval.
Long story short, the wobble kills projects. Like, the wobble is actually more impactful than things like scope change normally. And by the way, scope change is a form of wobble itself. It's a wobble in task definition or a number of tasks, these kinds of things.
Hi, folks. A quick one before we dive into this week's episode. Our book, The Critical Path Career, How to Advance in Construction Planning and Scheduling, is out now, and you can order it on Amazon. We'll include a link below. This is a great way to show support for the Beyond Deadlines podcast, and Greg and I have worked extremely hard taking everything we know in our 30 years of experience, plus everything we've picked up from shooting this podcast, and we've tried to pack it into an information-dense book that you can use right away. In the book, we have specific strategies on how to get a raise, how to get a promotion, and find a new job. We include 26 of the best interview questions that we have come across, in addition to 34 specific impact ideas that you can go use on your projects today. We want to thank everyone who's shown us support so far and enjoy this week's episode. Welcome to the Beyond Deadlines podcast, where we tackle challenges that planning and schedule leaders come across on a day-to-day basis. My name is Micah, and I'm the CEO of Movar US, a project management consultancy.
My name's Greg Lawton. I'm the CEO of Nodes and Links, an AI schedule management company.
Each episode is designed to give you tactics and strategies that you can use on a day-to-day basis. Today's episode, we're jumping into quantum mechanics. I can't even say that with a straight face. We're kind of jumping into quantum mechanics. Greg has a crazy harebrained idea, and he wants me to bash it mercifully with a club until he just cries and goes home. So Greg, why don't you kick us off and tell us a little bit about what we're talking about today?
Got it. So this is really looking at the cutting edge of research into project management and project controls. So this is not validated theory. This is just proposed theory at the moment. But essentially, it's this, and it's to do with scheduling. The method that everyone uses for scheduling right now is called the critical path method, which is really a process for how you determine how to shuffle activities based on predecessors. So it's based on the fundamental premise that activities are solid bars, so they don't wobble in a way, that they're solid, that relationships, and let's just stick with simple relationships like a finish start, that determines what hits what. And just like, I kind of think of it like you've got building blocks on the floor from your kid. Once one block hits another block, everything moves on. Then there's actually a third component to it, which is people realize that blocks aren't always solid. They wobble in terms of duration. So we introduced something called Monte Carlo sampling, where you essentially wobble durations, run the paths, and see what drops out the other end. Now, there's a large number of problems with this. Number one, no one has actually ever agreed on the process of blocks hitting other blocks. That's actually a problem. Like in legal cases, you have to agree the software first, because all different software, like P6 does it in a different way than, let's say, Project, which does it in a different way to others. So that's a problem. But the second is that a huge amount of the research coming out is essentially saying that wobble is more fundamental than blocks hitting blocks. And if wobble is more fundamental, then it should be fundamental, not the other way around. Not an afterthought or an after addition. There's a lot of problems with Monte Carlo, like central limit theorem, where basically it's the Goldilocks problem. If you run too few simulations, you don't get any results that are meaningful. If you run too many, it all collapses into a spike and you don't get any results that are meaningful. So it really is a finger in the air. I'm guessing a little bit. So what I'm trying to say is the whole critical path method is basically put together with gaffer tape. A lot of the research is saying that the fundamental assumption it's based on is wrong, or is not fundamental, is the right language.
So that thing created in the 1950s with people drawing out flow diagrams on a piece of paper may not be right. You got to get bigger, better news than that. And so then how does quantum computing come in and play with this?
So not quantum computing, quantum mechanics. So the great thing about science and mathematics is that normally someone else has figured out the answer, but for a completely different context. So for example, all of the mathematics for Einstein's general relativity had been figured out decades before Einstein put it into general relativity, but it was in mathematics, it was geometry. It was something called tensor mathematics, which is how you move from one way of looking at the world, like in circles, to another way, which is squares, for example. And the whole of general relativity is actually just based on geometry mathematics. What we're looking at here is we're looking for a kind of mathematics where, and tell me if this sounds like a project, where lots of things are possible until something happens, and then only one thing happens. And where the realm of possibilities is large at the start, so large, in fact, that it dominates the actual mathematics of the simulation. But when it happens, only one thing happens, and we can look back and go, that happened. That's the fundamentals of quantum mechanics. So quantum mechanics is essentially saying that there's a number of values like spin, charge, mass, hypercharge, like these kinds of things that can exist at any point in space. They are a probability distribution, and they're quantized in some way, which means that you can't have any value. You can only have a few select values. And out of that, mathematics kicks actually all of the particles and all of the periodic table and everything just from those simple rules. And long story short, the thinking here is that, well, why wouldn't you, instead of just giving activities durations, why wouldn't you just give them wave functions? And then rather than activities slamming into each other, what you actually do is you do a mathematical process called superposition of waves, where you add waves together. And what you would do is just add all of the wave functions of all of the activities and links within a schedule, and you would get the ultimate wave function of the project. And that wave function would then collapse over time, which gives you your actuals and your values. And what you would then do is iterate over time on your accuracy of wave functions. Now, I can already tell why this will not happen in a vast number of projects. Number one, no one measures that accurately. This is really for like repeat projects and these kind of more like operational processes. Number two, this is some complex maths. I haven't met many engineers who remember their wave function work, like lectures at university. They have definitely done wave function workshop because you have to do it for modeling springs and things like this, that element. And then the third element is the computation to be able to pull it all together. The software doesn't, like the software and the process for this don't exist right now. But the thought is that they should, and I'll tell you the final reason, and I'll shut up in that as question. The final reason why they should. A cool thing about quantum mechanics is that quantum mechanics just says that when there is a value that can be mapped over space, and that value can be quantized, as in put in discrete packets and described by a wave function, then you should have particles. Now, those particles can be real, or they can be what's known as quasi-real. So, for example, when you're modeling electrical circuits, you actually don't model the electrons moving through, because it's more like electrons bump into each other, and it's more like a wave, like in the ocean. What you do is you model holes, which is a lack of an electron. That you can actually model as moving as a particle. It doesn't exist, but it's an emergent property. And doing this, the theory states that there should be emergent particles that come out of project schedules, which would be, for example, the anti-activity, as in the reverse delay. like these kinds of things. Science has shown that those should obey the laws of thermodynamics, which basically give us crazy predictive powers on how projects will behave. I'm talking like really crazy predictive powers. But again, only if the projects are repeatable systems. So we're talking road, rail, buildings, these kinds of things. I'll stop there. It's pretty deep stuff. But I just really like that thought at the moment.
Yeah, no, I think it's very interesting to think about. I mean, to me, number one, I love taking other branches of things and then applying them into scheduling, because scheduling doesn't really have its own, as we talked about in detail, its own education system, and its own kind of body of work. And so borrowing the best from other places and putting it into scheduling, it's awesome. I think, two, let's go back to the wobble, because to me, activities wobble for a reason. And it's like, I don't know if when you're explaining it, I'm almost like, wait, did we skip over the reasons why they wobble? So the reasons why they wobble, not enough people showed up, didn't work productively enough, piece of equipment didn't show up, piece of paper didn't show up. We just put too many activities all in one, and that's why they pushed out. And so to me, when you're explaining that, I'm like, well, how does that play into this? Because to me, that gives you a better understanding of why they wobbled and how they wobbled. And like, how does the fancy maths, is it jumping over that, or does that create a better fidelity for information?
To be honest, I was thinking about this over the weekend, and I was thinking these are all great thoughts, and this kind of maths will be useful to projects in about 30 to 50 years when technology has caught up to track things at that level. Critical path method will not exist forever because we will have automated tracking of activities to a certain granularity, which will allow us to collect data to the level of fidelity that will enable us to use things like, I don't know, call it critical wave theory or quantum wave theory, whatever you want to call it. The thing at the heart of today and now is the conclusive research which has come out about the wobble. Long story short, the wobble kills projects. Like, the wobble is actually more impactful than things like scope change normally. And by the way, scope change is a form of wobble itself. It's a wobble in task definition or a number of tasks, these kinds of things. And if one thing came out of it, it would be that the large companies or the big projects where the impact is large or they can afford it, I'd be setting up performance monitoring teams that track the wobble. And this isn't anything new. This is things that manufacturing learned 100 years ago. This is what the Ford Motor Company did with the production line. They'd have people standing by with stopwatch and finding out why. Well, first of all, what the wobble is, and then trying to reduce the wobble as much as possible.
Yeah, I think this is happening when you look at projects that adopt lean and go to the production delivery model. But where I'm seeing that is too granular. Not in a bad way, but it's really directed granularly at the work front. Do you know what I mean? And so you're getting that production type method where they're looking at the flow of work. Like when we had Ian on talking about critical chain method, that's a resource-based strategy where your availability of workspace drives what you do. I guess where I'm seeing that gap is as you start to go up the food chain a bit and as you start to extend your forecast, that's where it just kind of that piece and methodology starts to fade away. And you don't get
it does.
It's almost like if I think about like a production line, and I think about, they're looking at it from, and again, I'm not saying this is a negative. I'm just saying this is the gap that exists because they're looking at it from one box to the next box, like how many widgets are going through, right? But they miss the, like, now I'm standing up and where the fancy people sit and I'm looking down at the production line and I'm forecasting where that widget's going to go 10, 15 steps later. That's where I'm going, but that's not how their system exists because they're looking at it from a short-term method. And that's where I think the biggest miss and wobbles that I see is, okay, now I'm looking at the entire production line and I have some data on wobbling. It's like, how do you look at the entire production line? And maybe you haven't even built the rest of the line yet.
So I'll pick on that because I want to pick on the move towards lean methodologies. So number one is they are 100% valid in the right circumstances, which is like at the coal face. But they're based on two assumptions. And people don't talk about assumptions enough when they talk about methodologies. They're based on one, which is absolute knowledge, so epistemology. You know what you need to do, and there's no ambiguity in what you need to do, and that will not change. And number two is what I call risk events, like handoff procedures and things like that. So they're based on a large part of the assumption that you control the process. But when you zoom out to a top level, if we zoom out to like data center builds, the two biggest things at the moment that I'm hearing in the industry that are delaying data center builds, one is permitting, because you don't control government. And number two is, at the moment, is supply chain shortages or lead times and these kinds of things. So you can have all of your widgets lined up perfectly, but if you haven't got consent to start, or if you haven't got the materials delivered on time, it doesn't matter if you've lined anything up perfectly. But zooming out, that's wobble in itself. So it's really approaching it from the sense of you can put wobble around all of these at different levels. So you could say, well, permitting, people normally do a plus or minus 10%. That's not what research says. It's more like -5 plus 300 sometimes on things like permitting. So
yeah,
it's like
I don't do minus anymore.
No, but to be honest, it's so large that it's so large that I'd be like, I'm not even simulating durations and things like that until I've got certain massively risky activities like permitting just off the books. And you're a big fan of this until I've got things like design 90% complete. And I just take as much epistemological problems and control problems off as possible. And then things like lean really come in and help.
Yeah, I think so too. It's switching gears just a little bit because Microsoft did drop some big news this week. Probably a couple months old by the time this episode comes out, but they dropped their quantum computing chip. My brain always goes to when I saw the Google announcement. This is like years ago, I don't know, 2016, where they beat the game of Go. Some impossible game. It's like, chess on steroids. And they built a machine learning model that figured out all these fancy ways to go beat the game of Go. That's how I view construction schedules going forward in the future. I think we are applying very standard human brain methods to achieving very complex problems and issues, and like the whole lean body of work covers it one way, critical path handles it another way, but these are all human-based solutions.
Yep.
So when you started bringing up quantum mechanics and some of these other, how to wobble the schedule, I'm like, man, I just don't think that from any of these angles that they're actually really approaching it from any new, unique, creative, mathematically different situations, angles, basically. When I'm watching like rockets land on the moon, or not on the moon, or rockets land themselves, and we've shot landers onto asteroids and collected rock materials and come back, and all of the technological advancements that's happening, it doesn't appear that someone is taking the angle of looking at it through a schedule and then using that sort of optimization. I do think there's probably a level of information and detail there that could help that out. But that's where I'm going. Like, I do think that you're going to get to a point in the future where it's going to be a better optimized point solution, but also the stuff we're talking about where you're looking at the overall flow of it, the overall how it stacks up that permitting. And there's going to be a better level of that. And maybe it's an AI person calling the permitting office every week, talking to an AI robot, being like, give me the permit. But I think you get what I'm throwing down.
For me, I actually see a future whereby all curation and coordination activities are actually better done by robots than people, and all world navigating problems are better done by people than robots. And by world navigating, I mean things like people management is a big world navigating, ecology, like these kinds of things.
You don't think your AI robot's going to talk to another AI robot? I have a hard time wrapping my head around that one.
The future has a lot of possibilities, but there's a difference. Like, if you put AI in robotics, yeah, then it really starts to get crazy. But actually pulling it back to what I see on a day-to-day business basis of what AI can do now, I see having full AI project managers now as just a matter of time, as opposed to a matter of capability. All of the tech has been invented that you need to do that. It's just a matter of time of gluing them together and teaching them enough stuff within enough companies. Now, I don't want to put a date on it. I can tell you it's not tomorrow, but would I bet my house that it's not in 5 or 10? I don't know. Like, if you asked me 5 years ago when I was, pitching the idea of AI in project scheduling and controls, I would have gone, it's a possible future and it's obviously one I'd like to believe, but it's one of these ones where if it's right, my God, will it change the world? Now it's pure inevitability. By the way, I was lucky that I was right on that. I just bet on the right horse. I could claim I have great insight. I've been wrong on many things, but I was just right on that. Yeah, we're definitely heading down the road of full, and it's not just project management. It's things like finance, tax, accounting. Like all corporate functions are going to have AI employees, and it's not going to be the little chat GPT that you're playing with today. You could actually have an AI boss. What does a manager do? A manager hires people, gives them objectives, helps them coordinate, prioritizes work. Like, now there's an element here that you could talk about. Well, it motivates this and that. Okay, I'll tell you what, I'll take the entire manager's salary and just up your salary by that much. Now tell me how much motivation you're going to need.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I do feel that I think there's a lot of solutions and capabilities there. We were talking about permitting process earlier. Okay, so permitting, you have to understand the building, what you're building. Okay, that's fairly easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
You understand what permits you need. Okay, that's just comparing your design with your geolocation with the permits that are needed. Most of them are located online in some government website. Then it's working with the local government agency to figure out what are the timelines and blah, blah, blah. And there's some little bit of human element there. But if you eliminated all of that work, there's an hour conversation, and then it's taking those permits and putting them into a schedule, maybe some cost of fees and things like that, and some document retrieval. That, to me, that technology exists today. It's just, I think a lot of them to me is the juice worth the squeeze right now of building a system that will be a little finicky, that could break, that might not work, blah, 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 right? And trying to refine these workflows over time versus just paying someone $250K per year to go do it. That, to me, because the people who would do that, it's just large organizations, hard to figure out. So yeah,
it is, and it depends on which part of the curve you're at. Yeah. Generally, it doesn't make any sense for organization, and I'm talking here construction companies or clients, to do this because of economies of scale and because of time periods, because you are going to get 5 to 10 years where that technology is finicky. But it makes sense for people like venture capitalists because they don't have they have the advantage of economies of scale. A company that creates that, they can fund quite easily for half a decade, develop all of the tech, and then you can sell to 20,000 companies. So it's more about those types of businesses rather than the construction businesses.
All right, tactics and planning that you can use on a day-to-day basis. Number 1, go buy a quantum computer.
No, I'd say 2 off the top of my head.
Figure out the wobble.
Number 1, figure out the wobble. And this isn't complicated, by the way. It literally is ask. If one took 4 days, one took 5 days, and one took 6 days, there's your wobble for the generally. But the more granular you can get it, or the reasons why, the better. So if you can do it in half-day increments, that's even better. If you can do it in quarter-of-a-day increments, even better. And figuring out why, and even just some basic understanding of these helps you control the wobble. And number 2 is simulate. Fine, use Monte Carlo. It's totally fine today. You can use that to simulate impacts. And number 3, what I'd say is actually just a more general one, which is, to be honest, reason people are listening to this podcast is just be curious. Be curious about where this stuff is going. I talked about some pretty hairy things around quantum mechanics. You don't have to understand the mathematics. You just have to understand the overarching philosophy or ideology of what something's about. And then you just have to be able to either hire well or structure processes or governance around things so it can be executed.
Or take that white paper, put it into ChatGPT, said, explain this to me like I'm a 5-year-old.
Oh, I do that.
And that is actually, I read, folks, a ton of white papers, and the vast majority of them go right over my head until I throw it into ChatGPT and I go, oh, okay, that's what they're doing. Got it. They just used a bunch of fancy terms, versus how my smooth brain operates. Well, folks, we've come to the end of this episode. If you could do us a huge favor and share this episode. Like, subscribe. If you know a planner or scheduler or a project manager who needs to know more about here's the thing. I guarantee you know a project manager who needs to know more about planning and scheduling. Share with them this show. Give them the support they need. Help boost their ability to plan and schedule. So that way, when you sit down with them next time, maybe they'll actually give you that good schedule update. For us, though, we will see you next week.